Is it possible to measure how smart you are without taking a test? Well, in this video, I'm going to outline 5 signs of intelligence you probably wouldn't expect in detail. So by the time we're done, you'll understand more clearly how smart you are and exactly what you have to adjust in order to become even smarter. To do this, I'm going to draw upon the most recent work in the cognitive sciences, as well as my years of academic and professional experience to validate my claims. So how many of these signs do you have? To find out, let's start with the first sign you're smarter than you think. You struggle to turn off your brain. Have you ever found yourself winding down to sleep or simply to relax, and suddenly out of nowhere you start thinking about some abstract concepts, asking yourself some deep questions, or thinking through some complex problem? Well, this is what's called mind wandering, and research has shown that it's associated with greater activity in what's called the brain's default mode network, which is a part of the brain responsible for self-referential thought, memory retrieval, and self-regulation. However, it's important to highlight 2 points here. 1, this applies only to mind wandering at rest, and mind wandering while engaged in a task is not associated with increased cognitive ability. And 2, the evidence for this association is preliminary and more research needs to be done. However, if you think about it, this hypothesis does make sense. Barring any stress, depression, or other issues, or even the fact that you might just be meditating, if you're just sitting there totally at ease and no deep thoughts come into your mind, what's really going on up there? Well, this brings us straight to another related aspect of this sign of intelligence, namely self-talk. Have you ever talked to yourself or even had a full conversation with yourself and thought, oh wow, if someone actually heard me right now, they'd think I'm kind of crazy? Well, don't worry, you're not. Or another way of thinking about it is that you are, but in a good way? Alright, according to research, increased self-talk is associated with increased reasoning ability, and in fact, it's a really great way for you to hammer out or clarify your own thought process. But if you have the habit of talking to yourself, you may also exhibit yet another aspect of this first sign of intelligence, namely what researchers call realistic self-doubt. Have you ever reflected on your own intelligence or knowledge level and realized you feel extremely inadequate? Well, research has shown that realizing your own limitations is a sign of intellectual maturity. But there's a balance here. While intelligent people are less likely to be overconfident about their abilities, they're also more likely to be accurate about them, in that they acknowledge their level of abilities, while simultaneously acknowledging their limitations. So it's not just all about simply experiencing anxious self-doubt. But aside from all this mental noise going on inside intelligent people's heads, what about signs of intelligence we can see out there in the real world? Well, that's where the second sign of intelligence comes in. You've been accused of overcomplicating things. You see, most people oversimplify things. They can't psychologically deal with uncertainty, fuzziness, or incomplete explanations. Instead, they have this sort of hunger to have knowledge wrapped up for them in a neat little package, tied up nicely with a beautiful bow. There simply can't be any loose ends, anything unexplained, or else they psychologically can't handle it. But intelligent people, they see through what you might call the BS. Whereas others see a neat little package with a bow, they see messiness and incompleteness. When someone tells you something like, well, that person's culture explains why they are how they are, 100 others will nod their head in agreement, but you ask questions such as, but what is culture? Is that statement generalizable? Are there more factors at play than we can see at first glance? What do you mean by how they are? How, in fact, are they? Now, there is a potential downside to this quality of intelligent people's minds, namely that it often leads to inaction, because you're stuck simply asking question after question, yet doing very little. But in today's world, I don't see this as the biggest danger. The current danger is in oversimplification, the use of empty slogans, the brandishing of empty intentions. And so, as thinkers such as Stirner and Nietzsche have done, keep pushing back on simplicity. Throw a monkey wrench into the simplicity and complicate it. Unwrap that neat package and expose the winding complexity of the bramble and thickets. But you can truly only do this if you exhibit the third sign of intelligence. You have a habit of arguing against yourself. It's a well-known psychological fact that two people can be equally intelligent see the same exact evidence, yet come to two completely different conclusions. But why is that? Well, it's because of what are called priors. In fact, in some very real sense, if we analyze what is called the Bayes factor in statistical reasoning, we can see that it's, in a very real sense, rational, even from a fundamentally mathematical standpoint, to come to two different conclusions based on the same evidence. And that's because these priors, or our subjective feeling of what is most probable based on our prior experiences or prior beliefs, play a vital role in how we view the evidence in front of us. How do we overcome these priors, though? We engage in falsification. We attempt to take the other's perspective. From time to time, I've actually tried putting myself in the other person's shoes, tried to view things how they do, tried to pretend as if I'm that person, and even for a split second, try to believe what they believe. From this kind of standpoint, you need to try arguing against yourself in order to properly update those priors and therefore have the most accurate possible view of the evidence before you. Another approach we can take to update our priors, or in other words, think more clearly, is to do what's called creating a steelman argument. You see, whether we acknowledge it or not, most of us fall into the trap of what's called creating a straw man argument. We choose the worst version of someone's argument, principle, or idea, and we argue against that. We don't disagree in good faith, but instead disagree with a caricature of their views. But challenge yourself to do the opposite. Find the strongest, most detailed, most sophisticated version of what you disagree with. Research it fully, understand it, and then if you still disagree with intellectual honesty and humility. These are surefire signs of intelligence, and doing the opposite is not. But if you possess this ability, you probably also exhibit the fourth sign of intelligence here. You get bored easily with surface level conversations. Now, don't get me wrong here. This doesn't mean that every time you interact with someone, you have to start discussing Maxwell's equations or Derrida's concept of différance. Although, come on, these are pretty great topics to discuss. But have you ever gone to a party, a networking event, or some other social event and felt like you were totally out of place? Like people were talking about mostly topics that have no real importance to the big monumental ideas of life. I don't know about you, but I just love it when I go hang out at a social event or a party one of my friends is hosting and find that I can talk about Immanuel Kant or the Congress of Vienna of 1814 or some other scientific, artistic, or philosophical topic and simply feel like we're getting lost in it for hours. And it's not about your education level, it's about affinity. I love when I'm able to travel and have a conversation with a cafe owner or some other person in some other country who has maybe a high school education but who appreciates discussing the history of their region, the food culture, or simply some ideas they have. If you feel a sort of mental starvation when you're not around people like this, then you're probably a pretty intelligent person. If your entire existence is about going to the pub every Friday to hang out and get wasted, okay, I get it. And funny enough, I actually don't have much judgment about it, and here's why. In these cases, you probably do have a lot on your mind. You probably are so stressed out from your week that you can barely think about anything at the end of it. You might have thoughts of survival crowding out your headspace so much that nothing else can fit in there. I, and also my mom, have actually been in that survival state myself. Alternatively, you might never just have been exposed to any other kind of conversation before, but I believe everyone can learn to use their mind at a high level. And when you start to become tired of shallow conversation, you'll know you're leveling up. If you possess all the qualities we've discussed thus far, then you probably also have our fifth and final sign of intelligence on this list: obsession. Now, it's easy to misinterpret me here. By obsession, I don't necessarily mean the standard psychological or clinical definition that implies a symptom of mental illness, although that's maybe up for some debate too. Think of some of the greatest thinkers, artists, and creators of value you know. Nikola Tesla, Amadeus Mozart, Jackson Pollock. These thinkers weren't just interested in their subject, they were indeed obsessed. In fact, there is some research linking clinically obsessive behavior to one's level of creativity, and there seems to be some overlap between at least some form of obsession and a psychological concept called grit. In the grit model, one principal idea is that those who succeed at high levels often exhibit dogged persistence toward long-term goals, despite repeated setbacks and failures. And although this model has many limitations, it does seem as though in order to truly create anything, the creator must only see the road ahead and persistently plow through the roadblocks, as Steven Pressfield lays out beautifully in his book, The War of Art. How many pages have I produced? I don't care. Are they any good? I don't even think about it. All that matters is I've put in my time and hit it with all I've got. All that counts is that for this day, for this session, I have overcome resistance. And this attitude goes beyond simply a deep sense of purpose. As he continues, look in your own heart. Right now, a still small voice is piping up, telling you as it has 10,000 times before, the calling that is yours and yours alone. You know it. No one else has to tell you. The real question is, do you have this kind of obsession about something? If not, how could you develop it? And what's standing in your way? Which of these signs spoke to you the most, and how many currently describe you? Well, just remember, your intelligence is up to you, and you can achieve all 5 and more if you want. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact not only on your own life, but also on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.